for being here. My name is Jasmine Poyalan, she, her pronouns. I am one of the program directors of the Economic Justice team at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights of the San Francisco Bay Area. I am joined here with my colleague, Hayden Rodarte, senior staff attorney of the Asylum Program, part of our Immigrant Justice program. So I'm really excited to present with Hayden for the first time. We are going to be sharing a Know Your Rights training regarding immigration under the Trump second administration. Um, yeah, I guess with that we can go to the next slide, which I'm not seeing it. Forgive me if that's just on my end.
Yes, I don't see it anymore. Hayden?
Okay, let me bring that up. I see it says screen share, but perhaps it's not actually sharing the screen. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that.
It's sharing the screen, but it's a different. Oh, perfect. There we go. All right. So as we know, the second administration is of Trump's is um, not the greatest. It's I think incited a lot of fear in the communities that we're part of, a lot of fear in the communities that we help serve. And so as a legal aid organization committed to marginalized communities, communities of color, immigrant communities, we're here to one, help advocate by sharing knowledge as the slide shows when we have it pulled up, knowledge is power, and information is power. And so that's one thing that we do as a legal organization to uh, help support that. We believe in people power. We believe in folks having the ability to band together in community and to protect themselves and each other. And so today we'll be sharing that knowledge. Yeah, we got us. I think that's something, if anything, I think the takeaway of today's presentation is that community is very important and that we have each other. And the more we share this knowledge and the more we protect and stand up for one another, the more we can fight back and resist against this oppression. So slide deck is back up. Thank you so much. Let's go to the third slide. Just a little bit of an elevator pitch of who we are, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. We are one of the oldest civil rights legal aid organizations on the West Coast. We were founded during the Civil Rights Movement in 1968. We have three specific program areas: immigrant justice, economic justice, and racial justice. So our immigrant justice program has two segments of work: the asylum program, which has been around for 40 plus years. And I'll let Hayden talk more about that once I give him the stage. And then impact work, where we engage in public policy, uh, both on the federal and state level. At the Economic Justice team, we have our Legal Services for Entrepreneurs program, where we provide transactional legal support to immigrant-owned businesses, businesses owned by people of color. We have many clients who are street vendors. And so there's a lot of overlap between our programs. And obviously, racial justice, our team there, they engage in a lot of impact litigation, and implicit in a lot of the immigrant justice work and economic justice work is also racial justice, as we live in a racialized society. And so all three of our programs really work hand in hand. And we're hoping that we could really share just how some of our work's very intersectional through this presentation together. So here's our contact information. We'll also share this by email. I believe the slides will be shared by email as well. But yes, reach out for our services if any of these programs seem pertinent to you. So with all of that said, we're going to begin with Hayden doing a presentation on immigration rights and kind of knowing your rights under the immigration atmosphere that we're in right now. And then I'm going to finalize it with talking about specifics for business owners and how business owners could also help protect their workers as well as themselves in this climate. So, with that, Hayden, if you're ready, I will pass it to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jasmine. I'm going to pause the sharing and reshare just so it is in a better presenter mode. I'm seeing that I'm seeing a little bit more of behind the scenes that I'd like to. Just give me one second. All right. I imagine that's much better.
Yes, that looks
Okay. Wonderful. Great. So thank you so much, and thank you, Jasmine and Anand and everyone from both the Economic Justice team here at the Lawyers Committee, from MEDA and the Immigrant Justice team. As Jasmine had previewed, I'll be speaking a bit about the immigration system here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and then also know your rights tips and some updates on local enforcement by what is primarily ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement here, also known as La Migra, in the Bay Area, and sort of what to look out for and how to protect yourself, your communities, and in this context, businesses, employers, business spaces, employees. So, kind of the way that the immigration system is broken up, immigration is a federal system that is countrywide. So when an immigration policy comes down, it does affect every part of the country. However, um, the states and counties and cities have other laws that can create protections, sort of push up against some federal immigration policies. That's everything from, these executive orders that I'm sure folks have been hearing here and there in the news that are coming down from the second Trump administration, to all the different policies and things that have been coming out of the Department of Homeland Security and its sub sort of agencies. And so the Department of Homeland Security is the main immigration enforcement department of the United States. It's the highest up, and within it, under it, you have ICE and USCIS. So that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as you can see on the visual here. And then beside it is US Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS. Now, ICE is the one that you've been hearing in the news. That is sort of ICE police and Migra, and those are the ones that are going to arrest somebody. They're the police force essentially of immigration when it comes to being in the interior of the country, as far up as we are here in the Bay Area. You'll also hear about customs and border protection or border patrol. Those are typically closer to the border, and we're not seeing really those agents deployed as much in the interior for the purposes of like immigration enforcement, kind of visiting people's businesses and homes, etc. Then on the far right, you'll see the Department of Justice. So it's outside of the Department of Homeland Security, and that is an immigration court system. So when you hear people that are being, that have to go into immigration court or have been deported, oftentimes they have gone through the Department of Justice through the immigration court system. And that's where an immigration judge will hear arguments as to why a person should be deported, why they can't be deported, and will look at different types of applications that can keep someone here in the United States or give them a pathway to citizenship one day. Things like asylum and other types of legal protections that one can file for when they're already in immigration court proceedings. You also might hear those called removal proceedings or deportation proceedings, but that's all the same thing. That is immigration court. And all of these agencies have local offices, and they're based in the larger Bay Area. They're based in downtown San Francisco, pretty much near the Montgomery BART stop. I started to explain this a little bit more, but the way that folks are typically interacting day to day, if they are a non-citizen, and a non-citizen encompasses, I mean, as it says in the name, it encompasses everybody that's not a citizen. So that's people with a green card, which is also called a permanent residence, a green card and permanent residence or lawful permanent resident. Those are all the same things. Those folks, and then folks without any status at all. So people that are completely undocumented, and then folks that might have something in between. Might be hearing things like parole in the news a lot, or people with a pending application, maybe for asylum, or maybe a pending green card application. So they don't have that formal immigration status yet, but they're on that way, and they sort of have a semi-status, and therefore are treated differently, especially under Trump 2, by the immigration system. So when most folks are interacting with these three different sort of like agencies that I just described, ICE, USCIS, and then the immigration court system, it's typically because if you're not a green card holder, you likely have ICE check-ins. Under Trump 2, we're seeing lots of ICE check-ins happening in person. There was a push during both COVID, just because everybody had to shut down, but then during the Biden administration to stop forcing people to come in person to do these, what can be very traumatizing, um, and also take up a lot of people's time, pulling kids out of school, pulling people out of work to attend these meetings at these check-ins at 6:30 Sansom in San Francisco. And that's essentially just so that ICE can make sure that the person has not fled or has moved, and that person is attending their immigration court hearings if they have immigration court, if they're in immigration court, and they have an upcoming hearing. Those are typically in person, but they also have different means of tracking people. Can track people through applications on their phone that are downloaded to their phone when folks come in through the border, if they come in without documents. They can also have people have to check in via phone calls, like automated phone calls, where they have to like punch in numbers. And unfortunately, in more extreme cases, and we're seeing these happen more under Trump too, ankle monitors, which look just like they sound. And all of those are handled through ICE and one of ICE's contractors, a private company called ISAP. And that's the company that sort of like keeps track of human beings through these applications that I just mentioned. Another category which folks might be familiar with if they've become a green card holder or they've gotten citizenship before is USCIS. That actually shares the same building as ICE here, that federal building at 630 Sansom. That's where interviews happen for citizenship. That's where other types of interviews happen for people that are seeking like permanent immigration status, like a green card, et cetera. That's not where things like asylum interviews happen. That happens somewhere. Those happen in a different building in San Francisco. It's things that are called affirmative benefits. So things that you're applying for when you're not in immigration court, but you're eligible to maybe get a green card through a spouse or a family member or some other like a humanitarian form of immigration protection outside of the immigration court system. And then lastly, we have the immigration court system. This is not, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but these technically, in lawyer speak, these are not real courts in the sense that they are not federal courts. So they're not like when you hear about, all of these injunctions or all of these judges from across the country that are pushing back against some of the Trump administration's policies, and they're, enjoining or stopping some of these policies from happening or issuing orders. That's not these courts. These courts are administrative courts, which are under the Department of Justice. So technically, the Trump administration controls them, but they're supposed to be neutral judges that hear people's immigration cases. And these are people who have been caught or have maybe committed crimes and therefore are deportable from the United States. And you have to prove that you shouldn't be deported. What you did shouldn't make you deportable. So if you committed a certain crime, that crime shouldn't make you deportable, for example. Or even if all those things are true, you're eligible for some type of immigration protection that should keep you from actually being deported and would grant you an avenue to a green card and eventually citizenship. Here with the asylum program, as the name says, in the immigrant justice system, and perhaps a lot of other nonprofits that you've heard of in the Bay Area, many of them focus on helping people who are in immigration court and stopping the deportation process by filing and winning an asylum case or a cancellation of removal case. There are certain types of immigration applications that immigration judges can hear it's not that are outside the USCIS system, that interview process that I just mentioned prior. And those are where you're hearing a lot of people having their immigration court hearings. They're arguing for why they shouldn't be deported. And that judge's decision can be appealed to another judge within the system and then go even further to the actual court system, the federal court system. Technically, it can go all the way up to the Supreme Court, the US Supreme Court, immigration court cases. But they're unique because they're sort of immigration, they're administrative courts, but not actually these big federal courts that you've probably been hearing in the news issuing all these orders against policies or for policies of the current administration. So it's really important at this time. We are a bit insulated in the Bay Area from the brunt of a lot of law enforcement, of immigration law enforcement actions. However, as we might have also heard in the news, the Trump administration in many ways is targeting California because of how outspoken, in many senses, our legislators and local politicians and leaders are against the Trump administration. So we can really see a pattern of the second Trump administration punishing people pretty systematically for pushing up against or refusing to comply or challenging the policies. So although we haven't seen a huge rush of immigration enforcement here in the Bay Area that's more than in other places, we still have seen enforcement actions here in the Bay Area, and it has changed quite significantly the way that immigration enforcement is in the Bay Area than before inauguration. So immigration law enforcement, like I'd mentioned, it's ICE. They are local agents are using different ways to sort of hide their identity because in the age of the internet and social media, there's a lot of attention and a lot of scrutiny on what ICE officers are doing, who they're going after, how they're doing it, in what spaces, what do they say, what do they do. Technically, you have the right to film these people. We'll talk about that in a second. But the way to identify the difference between ICE and maybe a police officer, those are really the only two types of law enforcement you should see out and about that exist. It's your local police, which has nothing to do with the federal government and should not, and are restricted from it here in California, from sharing information. Our local police cannot share information with ICE. With the immigration system, and they also can't help or support like actively. So you can't see like a San Francisco police officer helping an immigration officer to try to find somebody. That is unlawful and that should not be happening. So ICE officers, you'll typically see like some of these examples, photos will say police, they'll have a vest. They're oftentimes in plain clothes. I think in some of these photos, especially that top one, and what we're seeing more in the community are plain clothes immigration officers with sort of a semi-hidden badge. They're supposed to legally have some form of identification that they are not just a civilian. However, you might be seeing social media posts horrifically and tragically students and other activists and other people of color being essentially kidnapped off of the streets in front of their homes with people that kind of look like just anybody. They're almost always men for some reason. You're seeing a lot in the news. However, they will typically have a vest that will say police, immigration police, maybe just police, but it's always very important, like you can see in that second and third bullet point, to ask when you are not sure if you are being confronted or approached by someone to show their badge, to identify themselves. They will usually have a badge number or an agent number, and you have the right to take that down. Note that, and we do recommend that you do so. It's also to distinguish who that person is. Are you local police or are you immigration? And once they tell you the difference, then, as we'll talk about in a second, you have that's sort of like a decision tree in the sense, once you know whether they're local police or whether they're immigration, what you can do next, what your rights are. They are different in those two circumstances. Here is just one example of an ICE enforcement, just a screen cap from one of the earliest ICE enforcement examples in the Bay Area, which was near the Oakland Coliseum. There also have been immigration arrests within the city of San Francisco. The ones that exist, the ones that have happened so far are targeted to people with a significant criminal history that were undocumented. But ICE became aware of them or knew they existed, and then they pursued them at their place of work or in sometimes in neighborhoods, sort of looking for certain people, etc. So it's really important right now, and this is something that Jasmine had mentioned in the beginning, is one of the reasons why we put on these presentations and why information is so, so important at this time is to empower people and to roll back a sense of panic and fear that the current administration is weaponizing to freeze people and sort of and keep information, keep correct information away from the folks that are being targeted. To manipulate the news or to manipulate the law or messaging and to create panic within people and to keep them create as many obstacles between empowering people and knowing what their rights are and actually utilizing those things. So it's really important, and we'll talk a bit about this throughout this presentation, to verify information. So, for example, an example of sort of not leaning into panic is when you see a police officers, approaching a building or something, immediately thinking that it's immigration or ICE. We have a rapid response system, a network here in San Francisco, the San Francisco Rapid Response. We're a member of it here at the Lawyers Committee. Many other nonprofits sort of volunteer a member of their staff or members of their staff, and we all serve on this rapid response network. And how that works is you put in a call to the network, and we'll be putting that information up on the screen and other details about that. And we, as the different immigration advocates, will verify that that incident is in fact immigration enforcement, and we will try to get in contact with the affected people or their family members and try to help them however we can. Many folks, if they're arrested, they're put into temporary immigration detention at that same building on 630 Sansom, where I was saying where interviews and check-ins happen. They're actually held there for a relatively short period of time, but there's a jail in that building on 630 Sansom, and that's where they're temporarily held before they're moved to a permanent immigration detention center. There are a couple left in California. There aren't any left up in Northern California. However, they're typically placing people in immigration detention at Golden State Annex, which is in the middle of the state or in Southern California. But technically, they have the right to send people to any place in the country that they see fit. And there are few mechanisms to keep them from doing that once someone is detained. So it's really important to verify information, to work with the rapid response system so that we can work together to make sure that we are identifying legitimate enforcement actions, taking photos and video where it's safe, and you feel like it is safe for you to do so in your individual capacity. And of course, always calling, like I mentioned, that rapid response hotline.
Hey Hayden, sorry to interrupt. Would you be able to just slow down a smidge just for the interpreters to catch up to
Absolutely.
thank you so much.
No, thank you. And I'm sorry to the interpreters. I've been on both sides and I apologize for speaking a little too quickly. So in this next section, I'd mentioned previously there are certain protections that we have locally here at the state level, at the city level, at the county level to keep some of the more intense federal immigration policies from affecting us, the population here, especially the undocumented population or the semi-documented population. You'll typically hear those described as sanctuary laws. Actually, most of our cities in the Bay Area are considered sanctuary cities, and the state of California is also considered a sanctuary state, in the sense that we have state laws that mandate restrictions on sharing information between state, city, or local officials. That includes the police, that includes all the way up to the governor in the state of California with immigration. So with these different immigration agencies for the purposes of immigration enforcement. So that's everything, as I'd mentioned, from, you're not going to see police officers and you won't see the Alameda Sheriff's Department or San Francisco Police Department or Sheriff's Department assisting immigration. something that has been in this very disheartening time, something that has been quite heartening is to see the cities and counties step up, especially the sheriff's department, because they are our law enforcement here as much as we have to be suspect of law enforcement because of the targeting of local law enforcement of people of color and the persecution and the physical violence of our local police and police across the nation against communities of color and undocumented or non-citizen communities, we do have a healthy sense of suspicion. However, during this time, we have really seen counties and cities step up and be very vocal about resistance to immigration officers encroaching on um, our local cities and local populations and trying to, as much as they can, push up against the rolling out of new different immigration policies, including creating certain categories of people that are more of a priority to immigration. So they're going to be going after people, for example, that have certain types of criminal records that came through the border, maybe the southern border unlawfully recently and have been here in the United States, although above board, they still don't have any status, and therefore they're technically a priority now to the government. So any way in which we've been seeing the state, but honestly, mostly localities, really trying to push up against as much as possible the new immigration enforcement priorities that the second Trump immigration administration has deployed during this period. So like I said, there are limitations as to what local law enforcement can do to protect people, though, unfortunately, because it's federal immigration law and the federal government kind of controls that whole system, it does crowd out the local police from protecting people in any way they see fit. So, for example, the police, the state of California cannot, you might think of like, okay, well, why can't we just keep immigration officers from coming into the state at all? Like, why are we even allowing that to happen? Unfortunately, there's no way to do that under the law. There's no way to keep immigration from coming into a community, coming into a city. They have every right to do so under the law as it is right now. But the exceptions come in when it comes to information sharing. That's really where we can try to put as many obstacles in the way of immigration actually picking up a human being or identifying and locating a human being and putting them into detention. Because once that happens, there's nothing that really the California or a local police can do to protect somebody. It's more keeping them from getting there. And then, of course, working with schools and local businesses, et cetera, to help them create protection plans and family planning, et cetera, to make sure that folks are fully aware of their rights and can move into safer spaces if there is an immigration enforcement action at their home, school, business, et cetera. Okay, and this just goes through some of the things that local law enforcement can't do. Like you'll never hear a police officer, no, you shouldn't hear a police officer, I should say, asking about anything related to immigration. So that's one of the key determinations between if someone is an immigration officer and a police officer, is if they're asking you immigration questions that has nothing to do with local police, and therefore they should be identifying themselves as an immigration officer. They can't ask about if you've been deported in the past, what country you're from. Um, uh, they can't say, hey, immigration told us they're looking for it. They can't do any of that. So if that is happening, that's something that you should report to, the sheriff's department if you're seeing a local police officer asking those types of questions. That is illegal in the state of California. Okay. All of this to say, in that hearing more of this information, beginning to see examples of it, knowing that there are certain rights that you have, depending on your immigration status, but also in the space where you are physically, if you're ever confronted, or if your home or your school or your business is ever confronted by immigration, is really the difference between what's the actual danger to you and the people in your environment, maybe your employees, maybe your family members, your students, your teachers, and the fear that you have. This administration is really about fear mongering, filling up the space with the sense of hopelessness. And so trying to balance that with what the actual, as much as possible, objective danger is a really important tool to use during this time. Okay. So as I'd mentioned, it's the second Trump administration has been quite open about the types of people that are a greater priority to them when it comes to going out there in the community, sending officers to go there to arrest somebody or to question somebody, and actually trying to detain them and put them in immigration detention. And so the biggest priorities right now, the top priority, and this is consistent usually across administrations, but particularly in this administration, when there's a lot of language, rhetoric, messaging, calling non-citizens criminals across the board, whether they have a criminal history or not, is folks that have an actual criminal conviction in the state of California. Like they have a criminal conviction. They're not like in the middle of their criminal trial. They have been convicted already. They've been sentenced and convicted. They've served out or are serving their term in state prison and then are about to be released. That is the point where ICE is trying to track those people to essentially, upon their release, try to arrest them and either try to deport them then and there or put them into immigration court proceedings with the goal also of deporting them. But of course, once you're in immigration court, you can try to slow down the process and maybe stop the process by applying for something like asylum or other types of protections that you might be eligible for. The other type of people that are the group of folks that are also a high priority under this administration are people who have been ordered deported previously. You might see final order of removal or order of removal in some materials, including in these slides. That means that you've been issued a deportation order. You've been ordered deported by an immigration judge. Those people, and if you come back to the United States, so if you actually were physically deported and sent outside the country or maybe to your country of origin, so that includes those people. It also includes people that received a deportation order and never left. Those people are high priority to the government right now. And most often than not, the government has a lot of information about those people because they've been in the immigration system already and they're more easily tracked. That's typically where you're seeing those ICE officers coming into San Francisco. It's people they know a lot of information about and can track them. Other people, and this is quite a large group of people, this third bullet point, are people who came through the border without interacting at all with immigration enforcement within the past 2 years. This also includes people who have tried to enter unlawfully and been detained at the border and then been released into the country for the purposes of doing their immigration court case or because there was some humanitarian reason why immigration arrested them, detained them, but still let them into the country to maybe live with a family member or a friend in order to finish their immigration process. And then there's also a category of people, this last category is that before the Trump administration, there were various countries that the Biden administration had special programs, parole programs from Venezuela, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Cuba that allowed certain people of those nationalities to come into the United States or stay if they were already here with a special semi-immigration status called parole that would allow them to work and be here, but it doesn't allow them to become a green card holder or a citizen. And unfortunately, like we've now seen, it can be taken away almost immediately when there's a change in administration. And that is exactly what the Trump administration has done for this last category. So unfortunately, in the last 2 weeks, we have seen an enormous number of parole cancellation or parole termination notices for people from these countries. So that means that they are no longer here lawfully, and if they don't leave by a certain date, they will be put in immigration court proceedings, or immigration officers can technically seek them out to try to begin to remove them. Um, I'm going to skip over this slide just for a moment, but this is just to speak about the ICE check-in system, which we've already talked about. Unfortunately, the vast majority of documents that are shared between just people and the immigration system are in English. And so a lot of the documents that it comes to like your check-in, if you are in ICE check-ins, et cetera, those are in English for the most part. Your interview notices, your appointment notices, all those types of things. And so that's why it's another good reason to, at the very least, have someone in your life, but also with all the technology that we have now to translate documents, to not sign anything or agree to anything in writing until you've read it in English. And of course, best case scenario is to work with immigration counsel to try to figure out what you should do next if you receive something that you're not sure what it means. Okay. There's a category of people right now that we're saying that aren't in imminent danger, sort of like the previous group that we'd mentioned. And those are folks that aren't detained. They are neither can't be detained or there's a very low likelihood that they will be detained. And those are people who are US citizens or they're green card holders or they already have asylum granted or some type of visa already granted, but aren't citizens yet or aren't permanent residents yet. So there's really no reason for immigration to go after those people unless they've done something, unless something new has happened, like they've committed a crime for which they've been convicted and now there's an avenue with which immigration can say, hey, I'm going to challenge this person's green card and say they shouldn't have it. This cannot happen with US citizens. US citizens are not detainable. This is under the law, are not detainable, are not deportable, cannot be questioned and like gone into their immigration status, etc. We are hearing unprecedented stories of US citizens being deported to other countries and held in prisons. That is not something that is contemplated or thought about in the law at all and is highly illegal and highly unconstitutional. We're living in a crisis situation when it comes to sort of how this administration is treating even US citizens. So this is a new territory here that I would have usually gone through this slide in a second, but unfortunately we have to sort of think about as well the ways in which this government is manipulating or breaking the law for its own purposes. These are the very last category too is folks who are on DACA. That's a deferred action for childhood arrivals, things like temporary protected status, also called TPS, other types of special statuses that the president, that the whatever administration is in power can grant. Those are those are something that you should, if you have one of those statuses, should be constantly checking in with the on the immigration court, excuse me, on the USCIS website to see, or if you have an attorney, check in with them constantly to see if there are any changes in those programmings. The president does have the power to change those programs pretty easily, but judges and advocates are suing to try to stop those changes and keep people with those statuses as much as possible. Um, Another group of people that are probably not in enforcement right now is if you're already sort of above board in the system, meaning you're in immigration court proceedings, you have your ICE check-ins, you have an upcoming immigration hearing coming up, you're already in contact with immigration, they already sort of know where you are. You're likely, unless you commit a really serious crime or you've lost your immigration case, you're likely not a priority. It is always important when you're going to your ICE check-in to have a plan, know exactly what your immigration status is, know exactly when your next hearing is if you're in immigration court, so that you know you can calculate and make a plan, a safety plan with your loved ones or with your attorney if you have one. It's what to do if ICE tries to get strange or treat you in a different way or threaten you or your family members, etc. Never bring people, for example, to your ICE appointment or to an immigration court hearing that are not citizens. It's not safe to do that right now. Keep people at home. Go to these appointments just with citizens, for example, is a big piece of advice that we're giving folks. Try to keep as many people away from the immigration court system that aren't citizens as possible. So when it comes to immigration court, I'll go over this briefly because it's a little bit in the weeds and doesn't necessarily affect many people. Is once you're in immigration court proceedings, you'll have various pieces of paper that will arrive at your house. If you do not have an attorney yet in your immigration court case, you're getting these in the mail to your home. It's extremely important to keep the immigration court, the local immigration court that you are in. So it's either San Francisco, if you live in San Francisco, or most of the Bay Area. But if you live in sort of East Alameda County and beyond into Contra Costa, et cetera, you're going to be at the Concord Immigration Court, which is in Concord. It's a newer immigration court. Make sure you know which court you have to go to, when your next hearing is, and always, always, the moment that you know that you're going to be moving and changing addresses, alert the court to that. There's an online form that you can fill out to do that. Because if they don't know, a notice will be sent to a wrong address, and that could, in this climate, potentially result in a deportation because you've missed your hearing. And immigration judges have the power to order somebody deported even if they miss one hearing or are late for even one hearing. A lot of our judges out here are pretty progressive and they won't do that to people, but some of them will. unfortunately. So make sure you're always up to date. If you are in immigration court hearings, always know when your next one is, what kind of hearing it is, and where it is, and that your address is up to date with the immigration court where you are. What starts this whole process is you should have gotten a document at some point from not the immigration court, but from ICE or in the mail to say, hey, we think that you are not a citizen, you don't have any, or you're not a green card holder, you don't have a right to be here in the United States because you don't have documents, or you tried to enter the country unlawfully, meaning you didn't have proper documents. And we're planning on deporting you. So we've put you in immigration court proceedings to begin that process. And the reason why they can't deport you just right away in many circumstances is because under the law, you have a right to seek protections. You have a right to due process, which means you have a right to an attorney to argue your case before an immigration judge to say, hey, I might not have come here with the right documents or might not have them right now, but I'm still eligible for these other things, so you can't deport me. That document that starts this whole process is called a notice to appear. It would have your information on it. It is not a criminal document. It's not an immigration court document. It's the equivalent of like if you were criminally charged with something and you got like a, you know, you got a notice in the mail or something claiming that you were charged for a crime. That's the equivalent in immigration to this. It's claiming that you did something unlawful, but you get to argue otherwise. Here is the information for the immigration court hotline. So it's always important if you suspect or you know that you're in immigration court proceedings, it's really important, like I said, to never miss a hearing, to always know, have calendared, have noted, tell your loved one, and your family so that you have a plan about when your next immigration court hearing is, what was expected of you to do before that hearing, based on maybe what the judge said to you at a prior one. Like, I want to see you have filed this by this time. I want to see you have an asylum application on file before this next hearing, something like that. There are two ways to check what stage you are in the immigration court process, and that's just through calling the 1-800 line that's here. That's 20. Both of these ways are 24/7 that I'm about to say. They don't put you at risk. If you call or use the online platform, you're not outing yourself. It's just an automated system. There's no human behind it. So the immigration court hotline is the first way to do it. Really, the more interactive way though is to use this website here, and that's you can use it at the link, but you can also just type into Google immigration court case or immigration court status or something like that, and it'll shoot you this page, and you'll put in your A number, which is the number that was assigned to you and is all over your immigration documents. The moment that you started interacting with the US immigration system, you're assigned this identification number called an A number. It's also called an alien number. And it's a 9-digit number always, and you would plug that in here. And if you are in immigration court, it would tell you the information for your next hearing and what the status of your case is. Okay. I'm going to go over these pieces here because we've already spoken about, excuse me, one second. I'm just closing this little chat here. Um, uh, if you are in immigration court proceedings and you need help, you don't know what to do next, a good recommendation, if you're in the San Francisco immigration court system, is to contact the Attorney of the Day program. We have I serve on the Attorney of the Day program, kind of like the rapid response system. We have different folks that do so. You can call this number and ask for sort of like brief consultations with an immigration attorney about what to do next. Okay, so let's get to this piece here before I'm going to move a little bit faster now as we've covered a lot of this material already. But I wanted to talk about the different physical situations that you can be in and what to do if meeting at your home, at your school, in the street. And then Jasmine will talk a bit about what to do in your business if an ICE officer or officers approach you. General advice is always to ground yourself, to stay calm, to breathe. Once you've identified that that person is indeed an immigration officer and not a police officer, remember to do the following things in any circumstances, no matter where you are or who you're with. Never confirm your immigration status. Never confirm your country of origin. So the person's like, oh, you're Nicaraguan, right? And don't say, oh, yeah, I am. Or say, where are you from? Nicaragua. Don't say it. Silence is your weapon here. never sign documents or agree to anything, period. Okay. If you are arrested, just like you hear on TV, or you might have heard when the police arrest you, you have a right to an attorney. Remain silent. Plead the don't you don't have to say I'm pleading the fifth. You can say I'm remaining silent. I'm using my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. I want to speak to an attorney. That's all you need to say. If you're with other people or you feel safe enough to do so, technically those interactions can also be filmed or recorded. Remember to do that when it is safe. It is your choice to do so. But as you know, people can get weird when they're filmed because they know they're doing something that's gross or perhaps unlawful, and they might act out. And so do so when it's physically safe for you or for the people that are around you. And always, always, always call the rapid response hotline. The rapid response hotline for the city and county of San Francisco is the number that's here, 415-200-1548. That is a 24/7, 365. It's probably one of the more important pieces of information in this presentation. If you are outside of San Francisco, Alameda County, Contra Costa County, Stanislaus, other places that are sort of in the larger Bay Area, they have their own rapid response networks or other organizations that are serving as rapid response. You can check what your local rapid response network's information is by going to the website that's here. That's ccijjustice.org/CARRN, as in California Rapid Response Network. You can also Google that and you'll be able to find who to call. If you're within San Francisco, you'll want to call this number. That goes to a network of folks who are immigration advocates to verify what's going on. And then if it indeed is an immigration enforcement action, to contact immigration attorneys like me who can go out in the community and contact family members or the affected person and try to protect them or at least advocate for them as much as possible. Okay. So let's talk about briefly work, home, out in the street. If ICE comes to you in those different circumstances, all of the general pieces of advice that I said here always apply to all of these situations. So when you're having an interaction at work, it's always if you are an employee in a work setting, it's always important to working with your employer, et cetera. And we'll talk a bit more at the end here, is to go to a safe place that's a private employee only space. So a place that maybe a place where the public can't go. That's the safest piece of advice. ICE can only enter a workspace, enter a home, enter a private space if they have an actual court, an actual judicial warrant. They can't just have a piece of paper that says like Department of Homeland Security on the top and enter that space. You have to question and ask for a copy of that warrant, and you verify because you can see on the top of the document whether it is a warrant from the Department of Homeland Security or an actual judicial warrant. And only with a judicial warrant signed by a federal judge or a federal magistrate judge can they then go into a private space, like a private area of work, like a private property, like a school. To enter into that, they have to have that document. And if they don't, you can deny them access to that building, period. Um, this goes right over what I had just mentioned, is that you ask for that information from ICE if they claim that they want to come in and saying, oh, we're looking for this person, let us in. No, 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 no. Give me a warrant. I have a right to examine the warrant. I have a right to speak to counsel, a legal counsel, to verify that this is all sort of legitimate before they do anything else. Okay. I'm just gonna go through this. Hold on one second. Um, as I'd mentioned before, if a raid happens, and a raid is considered when there are multiple immigration officers who come to a location, um, uh, seeking multiple people or seeking a whole group of people, whether they know them or not. It's always important to stay calm. It's always important to not sort of run or physically go or physically sort of run at immigration officers or try to exit, because then they might consider that you trying to flee or abscond, and things can get physical or become much worse. Running away can also be a separate violation of immigration law, or maybe even criminal in some cases. Like I'd said, an administrative warrant is not a judicial warrant for them to actually come into a private space. And so, although an administrative warrant This is the non-judicial warrant allows them to arrest you. It doesn't allow them to come into a private space to arrest you. You always want to verify on any of these pieces of paper that ICE is claiming allows them to try to arrest you or approach you. You always want to verify that it's whose information is on that document, and if it's correct. They can't just have your name misspelled or have any old information on there to be able to do that. And remember, especially if you're in the work context or if someone else is affected, to be quiet. If you're a citizen or you're a green card holder, your best thing to do to help your fellow person is to just be quiet, just be silent. Okay. There's no reason why you should be telling anybody about someone else's business or immigration stuff, et cetera. That includes employers. Of course, employers have a separate set of obligations with the I-9 system, et cetera. Okay. The difference between this judicial warrant and an administrative warrant, just to have some visuals, this is an example of a judicial warrant. So this is the arrest warrant that they would need to enter a private property, private space, school, home, etc., to then arrest you. If they can't get in, they can't arrest you, right? If you don't go out voluntarily, they can't technically arrest you. It needs to have the name of the person, the specific spaces that they can search, and it needs to contain a judge's name and be signed or stamped and sealed at the bottom. Okay. It will always say United States District Court at the top. It will not say, for example, as you can see in here, this is not a judicial warrant. This is a ICE warrant. You see at the top, it says United States Department of Homeland Security. That's not a judicial warrant. If they have this and they want to get into a private space, sorry, come back with a judicial warrant. Maybe don't tell them come back with a judicial warrant, but say, this is not a judicial warrant. I am not speaking to you. I'm not letting you into this space. Goodbye. That's it. Okay. Hold on 1 second. Just give me 1 second here. And of course, excuse me, sorry, I'm going to share once more. Sorry, folks. Get the screen back up here. Ooh. There we go. Ooh. Hold on, folks. Don't look at the screen for a sec. You might get dizzy. All right, I'm just going to go back to the end here. So after immigration has left, it's always important to record what happened. Like I'd mentioned at the beginning, if to write down the badge number, to record the information if it has happened, to write a summary when your memory is fresh of what happened so that you can share that with immigration advocates. You can share it with the rapid response hotline. If they were doing something illegal or wrongful, which many times they are, just because they're immigration officers, just because they're government authorities, does not mean that they're acting lawfully, especially under this administration. What did they say? How did they act? Who did they touch? How did they treat them? Et cetera. How are they dressed? What did they say? What documents did they have? As much as you can write down, it will help that person, and it will help the larger sort of challenges to some of these really horrific policies, and the execution of those policies under this administration. I'm going to pass it along to Jasmine. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Hayden. That was just a wealth of information. As a non-immigration attorney, I learned a lot and feel much more informed. So, to take all of that and round it out, since there are many business owners or small business owners here on the call, as well as small business owners with employees themselves, just want to specify advice or information on what to do to protect your workers as a small business owner. Um, Go to the next slide. So Hayden talked a little bit about what to do during a raid or an immigration action, but I would share that before even there being a raid or any type of immigration action, is to find a qualified immigration lawyer or attorney, or at least an organization with some referrals. Now, you all are introduced to us here at Lawyers Committee, and so I would say like have our number on hand, find other referrals as well. It would be helpful if you have employees who you know could be vulnerable to any type of immigration action to write a written response plan and to practice it with the workers. So, for example, the response plan could be that if there is any of ICE officials identified or located, that all employees go to a private area on the premises, where in which Hayden explained that private areas require search warrants. So that is one example of what could be in a response plan. In addition to a response plan, it would also be helpful to provide a Know Your Rights training for all of your staff. I know folks are here to educate themselves, and it would be wonderful. And as we said in the beginning, to just share the information, to share the knowledge, because knowledge is power. So, something very similar to the information in these slides could be also shared with your employees or workers. In addition to knowing their rights, of the response plan could also include this information, including immigration referrals, as well as numbers to the Immigration Rapid Response Network. If you're in San Francisco, our slides include that. If you're outside of San Francisco County, there's information available online, and this information should be shared with your workers. So going to the next slide, this was a little bit discussed in brief, but I think it would be a good slide to kind of finish off of and kind of like round out the presentation. Now, what to do during a raid or an immigration action? There's specific things that as the employer you can say to any ICE enforcement when they come to your premises. Identify yourself as the employer. You can tell them they cannot go to other areas of the workplace without your permission, which is perfectly lawful. You could protect the private areas on your premises by identifying it as a private area, letting them know that they cannot enter without a judicial warrant signed by a federal judge, as Hayden described, and specifically asking for that judicial warrant after following all the steps that Hayden suggested of calming, grounding, as well as requiring a badge or identification from the ICE official. So you can encourage staff to video or take photos during the action if there is an action and if there is an actual judicial warrant. I agree with Hayden that, as long as you feel comfortable in doing so and safe in doing so, as taking video or photos could potentially instigate more conflict, but it is important though if safety is clear to do this because all the information about the raid, about the action, and about kind of everything that went on is very important following um, the action itself. So, in terms of the judicial warrant, it's helpful to ask for a copy of the warrant. If you have access to a copy machine or a scanner or your phone, to get a copy of it, to take a picture of it. Even with a judicial warrant, I think it's important that as an employer, you can still decline to give consent for the search, and that, and also uh, decline to speak and give out information as Hayden advised. It's important to watch the agents very carefully, keep track of what they do, because in addition to the suggestions that Hayden shared about kind of keeping track of everything, getting as much information down as possible, that applies to this situation as well. And the reason being is that when you do contact the Rapid Response Network and when you do contact your lawyer, it's very, very helpful and useful to give as much information as possible. Um, Finally, remind workers that they have a right to remain silent and to ask for a lawyer during any type of raid or action. I think that's very important, especially if stakes are high and, nerves could get to folks during these types of situations. So it's really important to stay calm and to protect your workers while also empowering them to know their rights. So um, with that said, I know we're a little over time, but if we go to the next slide, we just want to thank you all for participating, for listening, and for being part of this knowledge sharing. And we hope that you all are able to share this information with your networks, with your employees, if you have any. And yes, with that, we can move to questions.